About his son having a mistress, Mr. Joe figured it out right away. He scrutinized Matthew's face carefully, studying, and understood that he had a woman on the side simply because he saw himself in Matthew. Mr. Joe had been just like that when Mary appeared in his life. It happened to him more than 20 years ago, but the memories were so vivid that there was absolutely no point in denying that Matthew was a carbon copy of his father. "And how long has this been going on?" the father asked his son immediately, and Matthew just widened his eyes. "What are you talking about? Don't make a fool out of me, huh? Let's not play games. I see how twitchy you are, and I understand everything without your feeble excuses. Dad, why are you talking to me like this? Do you suspect me of something?" "I don't suspect, I'm sure. You have a woman on the side, so there's no need to deny the obvious fact." Matthew blushed, which only convinced Mr. Joe even more of his correctness. The son was acting nervously. He was rude to his wife, yelled at the children, doing everything possible to demonstrate his dissatisfaction, not only with their behavior, but also with their presence in his life. "Don't talk nonsense." Matthew glanced around to make sure Madeline couldn't hear their conversation. His wife was laughing cheerfully about something in the kitchen, where she was with her mother-in-law and younger daughter. Breathing a sigh of relief, Matthew turned his displeased gaze to Joe. "I'm not talking nonsense, I'm stating facts," the father replied. And he himself succumbed to the power of memories. Mary stood before his eyes so vividly that it seemed you could reach out and touch her, feel her scent again, embrace her, hold her close, just like in his youth. 20 years ago. When she was around and filled Mr. Joe's life with some magical feelings and emotions. "You know nothing about our life. You know nothing about Madeline or how we live. You and Susan come once a year, and you already consider it your right to lecture me." "I'm not lecturing you." Mr. Joe also raised his voice, showing dissatisfaction. "I'm asking you how long you've had a woman on the side. I know your behavior too well, your attitude towards your wife and children. And in general, have you looked in the mirror lately? You're a mess. Probably your conscience is bothering you, huh?" Matthew blushed even more. And Joe couldn't help but notice that his son's lips trembled. Everything became so obvious that there was no point in asking Matthew more questions. Of course, he had someone. And this woman had ensnared his son into her arms. Something had to be done. Because Joe knew all too well how such affairs ended. Fortunately, he had been through it all himself. So there was still a chance to save his son's family. The main thing was to set Matthew on the path of truth, to point out his mistakes and possible consequences. But apparently, Matthew didn't want to hear from his father. He thought he was doing everything right, and anyway, he thought nothing was noticeable from the outside. Probably, Joe himself felt the same way over 20 years ago, not realizing how foolish he looked from the outside. This thought made him feel terribly unpleasant, uneasy, and the man shrugged. Matthew had been married to Madeline for almost 10 years. He was 13. He was 30, and until Oksana came into the young man's life, there weren't that many women. Matthew's first love was his music teacher. Then he became infatuated with a volleyball coach, of course, also a woman. Madeline appeared in his life at the moment when Matthew was having a hard time coming to terms with the fact that the coach was marrying her longtime boyfriend and was expecting a child from him. Matthew was 18 then, and he took everything that was happening in his life very hard. "Mrs. Carroll, why are you doing this to me?" Matthew asked, when more than 2 months had passed since his confession of love to the coach. Hope still flickered in his chest. And the woman suddenly announced to her protégés that she was getting married and then quit her coaching job because she was pregnant and was moving to another city for permanent residence. Matthew, I just don't understand you, Mrs. Carroll wrinkled her nose. She always did that when she didn't like something. Matthew was simply amazed by how she looked when she did it. Don't you understand me? I love you, and you know it, he asked, with all the sorrow that could be reflected in his voice. And now this news in front of all of us that everything's great with you. Why should I have kept silent? The woman asked in disbelief. Yes, I'm getting married. I'll have my own life and family. And may I remind you, Matthew, in a week you'll be 30 already. For a woman, that's quite a respectable age, not a reason to start a relationship with a boy who's more than 10 years younger than her. I need real prospects, not a vague future with a little boy. But I'm not a little boy, Matthew pouted offendedly and turned away. Please don't consider me as such. I'm almost 19 already. I was ready to be with you, to take full responsibility even for the child you're expecting from your fiancé. Look me in the eyes, don't you notice how much I love you? I'm willing to do anything for you, but is your beloved soldier ready, the one you're marrying out of despair and just because you're getting older? Are you not ashamed, Matthew? Do you even think about what you're saying? Mrs. Carroll snapped, glaring at him. I love Jeremy. I want to be his wife, to be with him. And you just go to sleep because you're talking nonsense. So, love is nonsense to you? Matthew grumbled, clenching his fists. You're quite something. You look like a decent woman, but you reason worse than my classmates, whom I consider stupid. Oh, Matthew, let's just drop it, okay? I'm getting married, I love my fiancée, we'll have a child together, and you're not involved in any of this, she said dismissively. Matthew was angry. He wanted to punch Jeremy's face, who greeted Mrs. Carroll proudly every evening at the entrance to the sports center, but the young man didn't take any action. He understood that he was too young for this beautiful, toned woman with long chestnut hair. With a delightful smile, so there was no point in wasting time trying to get the attention of a woman who had known Matthew for more than 10 years. He started playing volleyball when he was in second grade, and by 14, he realized he was hopelessly in love with Mrs. Carroll. She was 26 then, a young, ambitious woman, and he was ready to follow her to the ends of the earth, fulfill any wish of his beloved teacher. Matthew didn't make huge strides in volleyball for nothing. And as soon as Mrs. Carroll moved to another city with her newlywed husband and left her coaching job, Matthew's desire to play volleyball further evaporated. His mother had already passed away by then. Matthew was only 10 when his mother died. And perhaps this was the main reason why the boy shifted his attention to women who were a few years older than him. First, the music teacher, then Mrs. Carroll, even Madeline, who later became Matthew's lawful wife, was 5 years older than him. Matthew always blamed his father for his mother's death. Mr. Joe was a brave and very attractive man, and his wife, Matthew's mother, was 15 years older than her husband. She worked as a simple accountant, they barely made ends meet, and she was happy to have what she had. Mr. Joe's infidelities, as he had a good position in the Ministry of Health of their region, became a common thing for Mrs. Nancy. She never caused a scandal over it, patiently waited for him to finish his affair, and never said a word of reproach to him. I understand that Joe is young and handsome, Mrs. Nancy shared her thoughts with her friends. It's our fleeting feminine age, and it's quite difficult to maintain your husband's interest. Well, when you're already over 40. But he's only 30, he wants a beautiful woman by his side, not an aging aunt in the early stages of menopause. Nancy, But that's not a reason for your husband to be with every woman in town and the region. Mrs. Pauline, who had known Mrs. Nancy for over 20 years, interrupted indignantly. You're still restless with these thoughts. You hardly enjoy realizing that Joe is out there, kissing other women, touching them with his hands, and then coming home to eat borscht made by them. You reason quite roughly. I'm not turning my husband into a monster, but I'm the victim here. I decided myself that I would turn a blind eye to his actions for as long as I deemed necessary. I don't want Joe to suffer. And Matthew needs a father. Plus, I'm comforted by thoughts of how beautiful our love story was, how Joe pursued me, and then how happy he was when I agreed to marry him. Thinking about it made Nancy's hands shake. She loved to think about how strong Joe's love was for her. How he wanted to be with his Nancy, despite her being older and married to another man. How Joe pursued her, how many crazy things he did for Nancy. And for her to say the coveted yes. Joe even went against his father and mother, but still wanted to be with Nancy. Then she urged him to open his eyes and not ruin their future, but Joe didn't want to listen. He wanted love. He thought he would spend his whole life with Mrs. Nancy. And then he met Mary, and the whole world of Matthew's family turned upside down. Mary wasn't just another lover of Mr. Joe's, of which he had encountered dozens. Mr. Joe, tired of his relationship with his wife, realized he needed a whirlwind of emotions, which he found when he married Nancy, and then they had a son. Married life turned out to be bland. Joe found Nancy too ordinary, sucking him into routine and monotony. So he began to immerse himself in one affair after another, going through women on his path and not particularly caring about their feelings. He showered his mistresses with gifts, took them to restaurants, took them to other countries, and they were delighted to be with Joe, indulging in hopes of a bright future. But he always left them, preferring his wife. Mrs. Nancy was also sure that Joe would definitely return to her, no matter how skillful and cunning his latest fling was. Of course, at first, the woman was very upset about Mr. Joe's affairs. She cried, suffered, worried that Matthew would find out about his father's adventures, but then she realized that Mr. Joe would definitely come back home, be by her side, and she would accept him without any extra words or scandals. It was exactly like that until Mr. Joe's life was touched by Mary. She was different, and it became clear as soon as the girl appeared on Joe's horizon. He simply couldn't ignore the stunning brunette with deep gray eyes and curvy figure. "How old are you?" he asked, feeling his throat dry up. Mary looked at the deputy minister with surprise and disdain, then shrugged. "Why do you care?" Joe was surprised. He wasn't used to such responses from women he was interested in. They usually started flirting with him right away, raising their value in his eyes and doing everything possible to attract his attention and strengthen their positions. And this young girl who came to work at the ministry as a simple specialist behaved so provocatively and boldly that he wanted to grab her and shake some sense into her youthful foolishness. "How dare you speak to me like that?" Mr. Joe changed his tone of conversation. He wanted to show Mary who was in charge, and she should obey him and even pray that he would be generous to her. "How do I speak to you?" she asked instead of answering, and shrugged indifferently. "Brat." Joe blurted out and felt his heart rate increase. This girl really was rude, but the man realized something amazing. He liked it. He missed resistance, the need to pursue a woman, so now Joe's main task was to get Mary's attention at all costs. The main reason Mr. Joe was crazy about Mary was her cold indifference towards him. The girl didn't try to attract the man's attention or respond to his courtship. She simply closed herself off completely, absorbing all of Joe's attention, driving him crazy with Mary. "I can't live without her," the man complained to his friend when they were relaxing in the sauna and, of course, in the company of beautiful women of easy virtue. She just drives me crazy. She manipulates me. She does everything to make me go crazy over her. And are you sure she's doing it on purpose? Chuckled Mr. Joe's friend. Maybe she really just isn't interested in what you're doing? No way. No woman has ever resisted my attention. And this brat just does everything to drive me crazy, and then I pounce on her like a hungry beast. Doubtful, of course, replied the guy. You can't please everyone. But Joe was sure that Mary was simply playing with him. He believed that she couldn't possibly not like him, she just had to show sympathy towards him. After suffering for several months, Joe went to Mary's house. At the door, he was met by the girl's mother, who was deeply shocked that the deputy minister of the regional health department was courting her daughter. An experienced man and an equally experienced suitor, Joe brought a bouquet of flowers and solemnly handed it to Mary's mother. The woman was completely taken aback. After recovering a bit, she invited Joe to come in. The atmosphere was modest. In just 15 minutes, Joe learned that Mary was the younger daughter in a family where the father had died several years ago, and now the mother was burdened with all the problems associated with raising and educating two adult daughters. So, maybe you need help? Mr. Joe politely asked, and the woman seemed speechless again. How can you help us? David can't be brought back. My older daughter got married. Mary is all I have left, but she helps me. And I can help you. For example, I can assist your daughter in getting a promotion at work. Or I can help you with expanding your living space or improving your housing conditions. For instance, facilitate an exchange of your apartment in an old residential building for a new one. The woman was stunned. While she was pondering, Mary returned home, and as it turned out, she didn't just come back from a simple walk, but from a date. Joe was deeply hurt by this. Why didn't you mention that you have a boyfriend? Jealous Joe asked the girl when she escorted him to the entrance. And why should I tell you anything about my personal life? A bold smirk played on her lips, which infuriated Joe even more. She was like a fish, so bright, beautiful, just as slippery and skillfully slipping away from his hands, finding herself in a favorable environment. Joe clearly didn't like her society. I'm your boss. So what? I'm not guilty that you decided it was your duty to control me entirely. But I'm under control only at work. Not at home, where you showed up uninvited and even without warning. Joe felt the desire to grab the girl and pull her close to him. For several months now, she had been teasing him, avoiding conversations, and continuing to be rude, while he was letting her get away with it. Mary was 22 years old, and Mr. Joe was barely over 30. Nevertheless, in the eyes of the girl, he looked like an old man. And he was also her boss, which made the distance between them even greater. Mary liked peers, and Mr. Joe went crazy with jealousy and desire to possess the girl by any means necessary. I'm an adult, and I want to make all the decisions myself, he said, reaching out to Mary. She recoiled from him, as if Mr. Joe disgusted her terribly. It wounded him to the core, making him hurt. Mary went home, and Joe still heard her voice in his ears. Her words were painful, heavy, and the man didn't want to believe them. He was lost because he had never encountered such an impenetrable wall before. Of course, not all women fell into his arms silently and obediently, but Joe had never encountered such resistance from a woman he liked before. All his thoughts were consumed only by Mary. It didn't occur to Joe right away that something was happening with his wife. Nancy preferred not to tell her husband about her health problems. She didn't want to burden him with her difficulties, simply avoiding the topic altogether. Dad, Mom fell down there. The heavy thoughts about Mary Jo were interrupted by his son's voice. Matthew was pale, his lips trembling. Nancy lay on the floor in the bathroom, motionless and barely breathing. At the hospital where they took her, the doctors just shrugged. Nancy, who fell into a coma, never recovered at home. And only after she was taken to the hospital did it become known that she was seriously ill, in need of treatment, but chose not to get treatment to avoid burdening her husband and son with her ailments. The death of his wife sobered Joe, bringing him back to reality and the need to care for his son. Of course, he couldn't completely forget about Mary Jo, but these thoughts were no longer as heavy and painful as they would have been before. His son didn't fully understand what had happened to his mother yet, but he was deeply upset by Mrs. Nancy's departure. And Joe suddenly realized that he now had to handle the upbringing of his child on his own. It wasn't as simple as it seemed. Then Mary's mother approached Joe. The man didn't immediately realize that Mary had no idea that her mother had decided to seek help from quite an influential figure in the city and region. "Mr. Joe, you said you could help us," the woman began the conversation, and only then did he remember his promise. He was not used to going back on his word, so he pretended to listen carefully to Mary's mother. "My eldest daughter divorced her husband. He turned out to be a real monster. He beat and tortured her. The children are frightened. My daughter was also very scared because of them and because of herself. I want to help her with the apartment exchange. They have a 3-room apartment. We need to swap it for 2 one-room apartments." "Swap? What does that have to do with me? They can perfectly handle this manageable task themselves. You see, the thing is, my ex-son-in-law doesn't want to do that." The woman hesitated. Everything fell into place. The woman's request was quite understandable and explainable. Her attempt to manipulate her son-in-law was unpleasant. But Joe suddenly felt revived. "I'll help you," he replied firmly, seeing hope on the face of the woman asking for his help. "But in return for one favor." "I'm ready," the woman immediately agreed, surprising Joe with her readiness. Nothing stopped her because it became clear how much the strong woman worried about her eldest daughter and didn't care much about the happiness of the youngest. A week after Mr. Joe helped Mary's mother, Mary herself was on a date with him. This event uplifted Joe because after his wife's death, he completely lost the meaning of life. Mary didn't want to have dinner with him, but her mother persuaded her. "I'm doing this only for Nicole. I'm not going to sleep with you." "This is just dinner," Mary immediately told the man. Mr. Joe smiled eagerly, then poured Mary wine, which he himself didn't drink, preferring stronger beverages. The wine bottle contained tablets dissolved in it, thanks to which an hour later the girl felt weak. It wasn't a sleeping pill, but Mary relaxed considerably. That night she stayed with Mr. Joe, and his dream of finally possessing her came true. By morning, Mary had a headache. She didn't understand why she ended up in bed with a man she didn't find attractive at all. Only 2 days later did Mary realize everything. She was horrified, realizing that Mr. Joe had boldly taken possession of her through deceit and then laughed at the helpless and clueless girl. "You're just scum," Mary said angrily, looking into the man's face. But he was so irritated by her reaction to their intimacy that he couldn't think of anything else but to ridicule the girl once again. "And you thought I needed love from you?" Mr. Joe laughed, though he felt like the lowest scum inside. "I wanted to sleep with you, and I got it. And it was all mutually agreed upon. You begged me not to kick you out yourself. You hung on to me, and everyone saw it." Mary didn't slap Joe, even though she really wanted to. She restrained herself and her desire to hurt the man as he had hurt her. Joe felt guilty. He didn't want to possess Mary just physically. He loved her and dreamed that she would love him in return. But all he achieved was spending a night with her, drugging her with some pharmacy nonsense. After that incident, Mary quit and disappeared from town, and Joe didn't bother to look for her. In his heart and memory, she remained a bold and willful beauty, a love that lasted longer than any other woman. 2 years after his wife's death, Joe remarried, then again and again. He only settled down after meeting Susan, who somehow reminded him of Mary. Both in appearance and behavior, she was strikingly similar to the one Joe couldn't forget. The main difference was that she loved Mr. Joe. He married her and settled down. By that time, Matthew had already started dating Madeline, and soon they had children. By the age of 50, Joe had changed a lot. He stopped being tough, stopped pursuing his goals aggressively. He became an ordinary family man, no longer seeking silly intrigues. However, his son's behavior and attitude towards him troubled Mr. Joe. Then he realized that Matthew had a mistress. It was too obvious how irritated his son was and how he distanced himself from his family. One day, having lost his wife, distracted by his mistress, Joe realized that he needed to take some action. So he decided to keep an eye on his son. It lasted not for months but for years. Matthew was really careful, and Joe didn't have much free time to spend on spying on his son. When he was about to give up on restraining his son, catching him cheating on his wife, everything suddenly became incredibly heavy, and Joe got scared. At first, he didn't even understand what was happening. He was passing by a restaurant, and he saw his son's car. He parked nearby, then walked into the restaurant to say hi to Matthew. His son was sitting at a table with a woman. Joe almost collapsed when he realized who the woman sitting across from Matthew was. Of course, more than 20 years had passed. She was already in her 40s, unlike when she was Miss Nancy, but it was impossible not to recognize her. It was Mary. She was smiling at Matthew, and he was gently stroking her hand, looking at her with loving eyes. Another woman, much older than Matthew, attracted him like a magnet, and she could have been any other woman. But no. Fate cruelly sent Joe's only and unforgettable love to be his son's mistress. Since then, Joe began to closely monitor his son, forgetting about his wife and home. One day, Joe was once again observing Matthew. Mary approached him herself. "I didn't recognize you right away," she said coldly, and now Joe could see her face up close. Yes, she had changed, but it had been almost 25 years since the last time they talked. "Have I aged so much?" the man asked sadly, and Mary nodded, hurting him once again. "You've aged. And again, you're in my way. What are you doing here?" "You're sleeping with my son," Joe said accusingly, feeling more jealousy towards Mary than a desire to keep Matthew's family together. "So what?" Mary's face changed slightly when she learned that Matthew was the son of her former admirer. "I love Matthew, and he loves me. Stay out of my life again. Don't ruin your son's life. I don't want him to destroy his family. I love my daughter-in-law, grandchildren, my son, to allow what's happening now." Joe said sternly. "Don't interfere. Once you already meddled where you shouldn't have." But Joe just got angry. Not so much at Mary's words as at himself for allowing feelings for this woman to creep back into his soul. After all these years, it seemed like everything was in the past and already forgotten. But no, Mary appeared in his life again. Again, she brought memories and passions with her. "I'm asking you," Mary said again when she met Joe near the place where she met Matthew, "just stay away from us. Matthew is an adult. We'll figure it out ourselves. Don't interfere. Once you already meddled where you shouldn't have." But Joe just got angry. Not so much at Mary's words as at himself for allowing feelings for this woman to creep back into his soul. After all these years, it seemed like everything was in the past and already forgotten. But no, Mary appeared in his life again. Again, she brought memories and passions with her. "I'm asking you," Mary said again when she met Joe near the place where she met Matthew, "just stay away from us. Matthew is an adult, we'll figure it out ourselves." But Joe was unwavering. He didn't want to believe that his son had managed to attract the attention of the woman who had tormented Joe himself for so many months. He didn't want to imagine his son getting involved with Mary, but these dark thoughts crept into his mind, destroying everything good in Mr. Joe. "Dad, we need to meet." The call from Matthew surprised his father, but he didn't refuse the meeting. "Come to my base, we'll talk there." For several years, Matthew had been managing a transportation company where he had met Mary. The story so closely resembled Joe's own acquaintance with Mary when he was her supervisor. The only difference was how the woman felt about each of the men. She loved Matthew, she hated Mr. Joe. "What's the urgency?" Joe asked his son when he arrived at his base. Matthew was sitting in his office, papers spread out in front of him, but it was obvious that his thoughts were far from work. "I know everything. Mary told me everything." Those words were enough for Joe to understand everything. Well, of course, Mary was afraid for her future, so she spilled the truth to Matthew. Well, now Matthew would need less explaining. "And so what? What do you plan to do?" "I want you to apologize to Mary." Joe stared blankly at his son. Matthew was calm, but his lips were pale, and his hands were noticeably trembling. "What's this about? And you act like you don't know. For deceiving her, for ruining her whole life, you owe her an apology." Mr. Joe sat down opposite Matthew and looked into his face once again. "And you don't want to apologize to your wife for cheating on her and stringing her along? We're talking about something else right now. I'm talking to you about Mary. Are you going to apologize to her, or do you want me to take revenge on your behalf?" Now Joe's face was stretched out in surprise. "It's curious, how do you plan to take revenge on me? And do you really want to find out? Do you really crave knowing how I will get back at you, my father, for deceiving my beloved woman, causing my mother's death due to that deception? She needed help, and you were busy trying to win over Mary. Do you think I'm a fool? That I don't understand why Mother died? You're mistaken, Dad, deeply mistaken." Two strong guys entered the office and stood on either side of the door. "So, I understand that you're not planning to apologize?" Matthew asked, which Joe understood was his last chance. "I don't see the need to do that," Joe replied, and the strong guys lifted the man by the arms. Matthew didn't mince words with his father. He was brutally beaten, then tied to a tree in the strip of forest near his son's work base. As a parting gesture, Matthew poured icy water over his father. He looked Mr. Joe in the face with a smirk. "Now stay here and think. Maybe a sober thought will come to you." Matthew left. And Mr. Joe, fighting excruciating pain in his body, realized that the time had come to pay for his dirty past. Thoughts were flying chaotically in his head, his whole body ached, and he was thirsty. Joe thought he wouldn't last long like this. Whether his son would return, or if he had left him here forever, was unclear. "Grandpa." The voice nearby was thin and ringing. Joe opened his eyes. "Who are you?" he asked the girl, whose face was red and wet with tears. "My name is Nicole. I got lost." "Grandpa, why were you tied to a tree?" Mr. Joe sighed, then smiled. The question of who could tie an aging lover hero in the middle of the forest so captivated her that she stopped crying and was full of curiosity. It's for bad behavior. The man chuckled and nodded to the girl. And could you help me, for example, untie myself? That way we could get out of here faster and get to your parents. My mom abandoned me, my grandma raised me. I came with her to Uncle Matthew's work, and then I ran away because Uncle Matthew was yelling loudly at someone. Joe flinched. It turned out that the girl somehow knew Matthew, and, most likely, the screams she heard were the result of the son being angry with his father. Little Nicole, what's your grandma's name? She blinked, then answered without thinking about why a stranger in the forest was interested. Grandma Mary. When, after about 30 minutes, the girl managed with great difficulty to untie Joe, he was eager to figure everything out. How could the girl end up in the middle of the forest, and moreover, turn out to be Mary's granddaughter? Thoughts raced through his head. He desperately wanted a drink. But Joe, holding Nicole's hand, confidently headed towards his son's base. Especially since all the roads were perfectly familiar to him. He met Mary as he approached the base. The woman was in tears, pacing back and forth, and then she saw Nicole and rushed to her granddaughter. Mr. Joe stood nearby, not taking his eyes off her. She's your granddaughter. She saved my life beautifully, and I, probably, saved her life. You know there are wolves in these woods? Mary looked at Mr. Joe with tear-filled eyes. She's your granddaughter. Mr. Joe stopped dead in his tracks. I gave birth to your daughter back then. Wayward, unwanted by me. She hated me, and I hated her. Gave birth to a daughter, dumped her on me. Ran away herself. I can't tell you the truth, but I continued to hate everything that remained in the past. Joe was silent. He felt that he had paid for everything. And even spending half a day in the woods, tied to a tree, was only 1/100th of all the trials that fate had prepared for him. But he was ready to endure everything. He had a daughter, a granddaughter, and there was Mary, whom he so desperately needed and was willing to do anything to have her by his side again. This time, solely by his own will.